الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل بدعة ضلالة ثم أما بعد أيها الأحبة الكرام السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته وتقبل الله منا ومنكم صالح الأعمال وكل عام وأنتم بخير. Inshallah, before we start our class, just a couple points which is related to the Salah. The first point is the performance of a Sunnah prayer at the time of the Iqamah. The Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith, إِذَا أُقِيمَتِ الصَّلَاةِ فَلَا صَلَاةَ إِلَّا الْمَكْتُوبَةِ. If the Iqamah for the Salah is called, then there is no prayer should be performed except the Salah for which the Iqamah was called. Now, if the Iqamah is called, then you should not start any prayer, any Sunnah prayer, even Sunnat al-Fajr, which is highly stressed. But if you are in the middle of the Salah and the Iqamah is being called, then we should see. This is a stronger opinion here, that if you already completed or finished the first rak'ah of that Sunnah prayer and started the second rak'ah, then you need to finish the second rak'ah quickly and join the Salah. But if you are already in your first rak'ah and you do not finish your first rak'ah yet, then you ought to get out of that Salah and join the Safardi prayer. This is one thing. The other thing, which is related to straightening the lines and the rows of the Salah, it was mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari, in the famous hadith, that the Sahaba used to straighten the lines by aligning their shoulders and their ankles. كان أحدنا يلزق منكبه بمنكب أخيه وكعبه بكعب أخيه. That is, the hadith says that one of us used to paste his shoulder with his brother's shoulder and his ankle with his brother's ankle. It does not mean that you have to push your feet, against your brother's feet, but to be as close as practically possible. Okay, this is the proper way to straighten the lines. Now back to business transactions. Last week, for a couple lectures, we talked about the categories or the different categories of sale contracts. Inshallah, starting today, we'll be talking about prohibited transactions. Prohibited transactions or prohibited contracts. A transaction is prohibited in Islam for one or more of the following reasons, or if any one of the following aspects or things are present in a contract, this will render the contract as invalid. The first thing or the first aspect is al-gharar. Al-gharar. Gharar is uncertainty. طيب. The second aspect is deception or al-khadi'ah. Deception. The third is injustice. And the fourth one is riba. If any one or more of one of those are present in a contract, the contract is considered to be invalid. All it will render the contract as invalid. Again, those four are al-gharar, which is uncertainty, al-khadi'ah, which is deception, al-dhulm, or injustice, and the fourth one is riba, usury, or interest. Type. The first aspect, which is al-gharar, which is uncertainty, ambiguity, and also speculation. and it refers to the hazard due to the lack of clarity of the subject matter. Lack of clarity of the subject matter of the contract, like the merchandise or the price. This is the so-called al-gharar, and it was mentioned in the authentic hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that the Prophet ﷺ forbids gharar, that it is prohibited to deal in a contract that has gharar in it. And I will give inshallah some examples of al-gharar. In our modern transactions, a clear example is insurance. Like, for example, automobile or health insurance. It's prohibited in Islam because it contains gharar. What is the definition of insurance? At-ta'min. It's a promise of compensation for a potential future losses in exchange of periodical payments. Yani you pay installments, or the insured pays installments or periodic payment to the insurer. What would be the return? The return is, in case if he get into an accident, then he will get compensation from the insurer. And because of this, or because of the presence of gharar or uncertainty, because you might purchase your insurance and drive your car for years without having an accident, or a person might purchase an insurance and get into an accident next day. So there's uncertainty. Because of the presence of the uncertainty, this type of contracts is invalid in Islam. There are some exceptions. There are some exceptions. For example, if there is a need for you to have, for example, automobile insurance, then this will be an exception. You can have it. Okay? And inshallah, we're going to talk about insurance in a very detailed manner when we get to modern transactions, inshallah. Maybe next week, inshallah. Because there are other exceptions. There are other exceptions for this example of insurance. Okay, this is the first example for gharar, or a contract that contains gharar. Another example is the sale of non-existing item. To sell a non-existing item, it is not in existence now. Now, according to the majority of the scholars, the Hanafis, the Shafi'is, and the Hanbalis, that you cannot sell anything which is not in existence now. Of course, with the exception of as-salam and al-istisna', the forward sale, which we discussed last week, and also the contract of manufacturer. Those are the exceptions. But for the other things which is not in existence, according to the majority of scholars, you cannot sell it at all. According to the Maliki, they said they agreed, but they also made another exception. They said, except uqud al-tabarru'at, contracts of charity, like a gift. And a gift, even if the gift is not in existence, they said it would be acceptable, because there is no harm. You know, they said uqud al-tabarru'at is one-sided commitment, and the consent of the recipient is not required. So in such type of contracts, the Malikis made another exceptions. According to Sheikh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah and his student Ibn al-Qayyim, they said there is no evidence in the Quran or the Sunnah that forbids the sale of non-existing items. What the Sharia prohibited is al-gharar, uncertainty, whether the object or the item is in existence or not. So according to them, you can sell a non-existing item as long as you would be able to deliver it. Inshallah, we're going to talk about this also later on in details. But I mention it now as an example of gharar as cited by the majority of the scholars. طيب. Another example is to the sale of something that you do not own, or you own it but it is not actually in your possession. Now for this here, all the scholars agreed on that you cannot sell anything that you do not own. And also they agreed that for things that is not under your possession now, especially food, because there is a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ in which he forbids selling food before actually having it in your possession, food items. They also agreed on that. But other than food items, there is a disagreement among the scholars that you can sell it as long as you own it, even if it is not under your possession now, but you own it and you can deliver it, then you can sell it. This is another example of al-gharar. A fourth example is the so-called bay' al-muzabana, the sale of al-muzabana, and it is the sale of a known quantity in exchange for unknown quantity, a known price for unknown quantity. And usually al-muzabana is in fruits and plants, like selling fruits on the tree for dry fruit, or dates on the tree for dry dates, like a farmer who has his the dates are still on the trees, is not ready for harvest yet, so he just estimated how much he would produce and then sell it for dry dates now. This is called muzabana, and the Prophet ﷺ forbids muzabana, but sallallahu he made an exception, which is called bay' al-araya. If it is less than 5 wusq. A wusq is a measure. We said 1 wusq is equal to about 60 sa'. 60 sa'. Okay, so the exception is if it is less than 5 wusq or 300 sa'. They can trade it just to make their lives easier. So this is an exception, but not more than that. So for example, the farmer could estimate, an amount of 300 sa', and he can trade it for 300 sa' of dry dates now. This is an exception. But in general, bay' al-muzabana, because he is selling something which is not in existence, and the delivery of it is not certain, it comes under gharar and it is prohibited. Also, another example is to sell something which is undeliverable, something that you will not be able to deliver it, even if you own it, even it is in existence. Like if you have a car or an object that went missing, that gone missing, or stolen. You have the title, you own it, it is under your name, but it is stolen. So you cannot sell it. Why? Because they will not be able to deliver it. Another example of a sale contract that's prohibited is called bay'ul hasa. Hasa is pebble, and it is a known type of contracts at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and this is when the seller says to the buyer, throw this pebble and whatever merchandise it lands on is yours for such and such price, because it involves gharar, uncertainty. You don't know. You might throw the pebble, it might fall in this merchandise or that or this, okay? Because it involves gharar, this type of sale contract is prohibited. It is forbidden. Similar to that, nowadays in some stores, when you go, there is like a box and they have many things in it. Okay, and then you put your quarters and then you roll something and one of the items will come and you don't know which one. You know, the cheap or less expensive or the expensive, you don't know. So it is prohibited for that. And also an example of gharar is gambling or lottery. Okay, all those are examples of gharar. So the presence of gharar, which is uncertainty or speculation, in any contract will render the contract as invalid. It becomes an invalid contract, or it becomes forbidden to get in that contract. This is the first aspect. The second aspect is deception. And deception, which is in Arabic is called al-khadi'a, bay' al-khadi'a, which is a contract that involves deception. طيب. The Prophet ﷺ says, "Man ghashana falaysa minna." Man ghashana falaysa minna. Whoever deceives us, he is not one of us. Okay, so deception is haram, and deception is to sell an item to someone, for example, who does not know about goods for very high price. So taking advantage of his ignorance about such types of goods, which is khadi'a, which is deception. A known type of sale contracts at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, which involves deception, the Prophet ﷺ made it prohibited, is the so-called bay'ul musarrah. Al-musarrah is an animal that left for a number of days without being milked, to have the milk, accumulated in the udder of that animal, to deceive the buyer that he thinks, oh, this is a great deal, a cow that could produce a lot of milk. This is also prohibited. So the second aspect, which is the presence of deception, this will render a contract as invalid. The third one, which is injustice, the presence of injustice. And injustice, which is a dhulm, either injustice to oneself or to others, or to oneself and others. An example of injustice to oneself is the sale at the time of adhan, the second adhan of Jum'ah prayer. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع. وذروا البيع. This is a command not to perform bay' at the time of the adhan. Not to perform bay'. It's prohibited to perform at the second adhan of Jum'ah. What is the illah? Why bay' is prohibited at that time? The illah, or the effective cause for the prohibition, is the distraction from praying or from attending the Jum'ah prayer. And subhanAllah, you look to this ayah, it shows that khutbatul Jum'ah is what? Is an obligation. It's an obligation to attend. Why? Because even things which is allowed for us to deal with becomes prohibited at that time, in order to come and listen to the khutbah. Buying and selling is permissible for us, but at that moment when the adhan is being called for the Jum'ah prayer, then you have to leave selling or buying and get to the masjid to listen to the Jum'ah khutbah. Why? Because the khutbah just comes right after the adhan. But anyhow, any transaction that performed or conducted when the adhan, the second adhan of Jum'ah is called, is null, is invalid, and it's prohibited to get into a contract like that. Now the ayah mentioned al-bay', right? What about a lease contract or a marriage contract? Can a marriage contract performed at that time? If someone said no, yeah, you can do it, because the ayah only mentioned bay', which is sale contract. So what would be the proper response for that person is using qiyas. The IIS talked about only sale contract, but we knew the illah, the effective cause of the prohibition. So any other transaction that have the same illah, would become prohibited. So whether it's a lease contract or a marriage contract or anything that would distract the person from responding to the call of the prayer and coming to attend the khutbah becomes prohibited. This is one type of a contract or types of contracts that prohibited because of injustice to oneself. And the injustice here is the commission of the sin. Because the one who commits sins, he is doing injustice to himself. Okay? And the greatest injustice that a human can do to himself is commission of shirk, to commit shirk. إن الشرك لظلم عظيم. طيب. Also some transactions are forbidden because of injustice to others. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ prohibited البيع على بيع أخيه. قال لا يبيع أحدكم على بيع أخيه ولا يخطب على خطبته. Now, you should not make an offer against an offer made by your brother. And I want to explain this. Here, this hadith refers to an offer after the contract is already concluded between the two parties, but they are still available in that place where each one of them have the right to revoke the contract. At that moment, at that time, it's prohibited for a third party to give an offer. Like for example, if a brother sold his car for $1,000 for another brother, and they concluded the contract. They have the offer and the acceptance, but they are still available in the same place. And we know that if they are still available, each one of them has the right to revoke the contract. Then a third brother come to the buyer and he said, look, I have a similar car. I will give it to you for $800. This is prohibited. Such type of transaction is prohibited. Or a third party come to the seller and he said, you know, I will offer you $1,200. This is also prohibited. لا يبيع الرجل على بيع أخيه ولا يخطب على خطبته. It is prohibited because this is an injustice, you know, to others. So those are some examples of contracts that are prohibited because they contain either gharar, which is uncertainty, deception, which is khadi'ah, or injustice. And the fourth aspect that would render a contract as invalid is riba, and this will, inshallah, will be the topic of tomorrow. But in general, if there is an interest article or usury or riba in any contract, this will render a contract as invalid. It becomes an invalid. Just one point regarding the insurance. We said the regular types of insurance, like commercial insurance, like home insurance or automobile insurance or health insurance, are prohibited because of the presence of gharar, of uncertainty. But life insurance is prohibited because of two reasons: gharar, which is uncertainty, and riba. Gharar is very clear because no one knows when he'll die, and riba because usually the installments paid is far less than the compensation that would be given to the family. Like for example, a policy in which the insured pays around maybe $80 or $60. You know, the policy is for like $500,000 or $1 million. So this is riba, because at the end, if that person died, his family will get more than being paid, which is riba. This exchange for money, money for money, you know, less money for more money, which is riba. And this is why life insurance will not become allowable. You cannot think about any circumstances where it becomes allowable. Okay, with one exception, if it is offered to you free. If it's offered to you as free, then of course there is no provision, because here it's not a contract. It is like a gift. Okay, but if it is for compensation, like you pay certain amount in return to your family getting a huge compensation upon your death, this is prohibited. Wallahu ta'ala ajallu wa a'lam. Inshallah, I'm going to stop right here, and as I said, tomorrow we'll talk in details about riba, and then afterwards next week inshallah we'll talk about modern transaction. We're going to talk about credit cards in a very detailed manner. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك وصلى اللهم وسلم وبارك على محمد.